up, everybody? Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishineff, and we're reading Defining Moments in Black History by Dick Gregory. Remember, if you enjoy the episode, hit that like and subscribe button. I won't mind a bit. And let's get right to it. Shirley Chisholm runs for president. Here's a lesson on how people's minds get messed up. Shirley Chisholm, the first black congresswoman in America, was born in 1924 in Brooklyn, New York. Didn't have much money. From the ages 3 to 10, Shirley lived on her grandmother's farm in Barbados in the Caribbean. Barbados is more than 90% black. Think about that. For 7 years when she was a small child, which is when your mind and your ideas about the world are forming, she wasn't around anybody but black folks. She didn't see black folks being told they were inferior to white folks or acting like they were. There were almost no white folks around for them to feel inferior to. She got to see black folks in charge. Black people in the Caribbean felt differently about themselves. Not like here, where we grow up being told in 100 different ways that we're no good and we believe it, and we don't even know we believe it. In her book, Unbought and Unbossed, Shirley Chisholm writes that Barbados is a rocky place, not lush like Jamaica or Trinidad, end quote. Folks there weren't sitting around sipping pina coladas. They were serious. They may have been mostly farmers, but when they went to school, they learned. And the ones who came to the United States came with a purpose. Chisholm writes in her book that they all wanted the same two things: a brownstone house and a college education for their children. And most of them got it. Chisholm certainly got a college education and then some. Studied at Brooklyn College and then got a master's degree at Columbia University. Studied elementary education and won prizes for debating. She was so good at debating, in fact, that folks told her she should go into politics. Next thing you know, she was in the New York State Assembly. And after that, the U.S. Congress starting in 1968. When she got there, they tried to put her on the Agriculture Committee. They must have thought the people she represented rode tractors instead of the subway, but Shirley wasn't having it. She told them just what they could do with their Agriculture Committee. And that's how she got on the Education and Labor Committees, working on stuff people cared about. After that, she ran for president. In fact, she became the first woman Democrat and the first black woman from a major party to do it. Weren't too many folks thinking about a black president in 1972, but as Shirley said, somebody had to do it first. See, that's the kind of thing you can do when you don't feel you're inferior to other folks. And Shirley didn't just run. In the New Jersey primary, she came out ahead of a white dude named Terry Sanford, who had been governor of North Carolina. Now this tells you what she did, but it doesn't tell you who she was. Now look at this. The same year, 1972, George Wallace ran for president. I'll say this one thing for Wallace. He was honest. He didn't like black folks, and he told people he didn't like black folks. When he was the governor of Alabama, his unofficial motto was segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he meant what he said, which was why he went to the University of Alabama in person in 1963 to block black students from getting in there. You hear me? He didn't send in the police. He went there himself. Then on May 15th, 1972, Wallace got shot. He was paralyzed for the rest of his life. While he was in the hospital, you know who went to visit him? Shirley Chisholm. Black people gave her 99 kinds of grief for doing that, but she believed it was the right thing to do. Even Wallace was moved. He asked her, "What are your people going to say?" She told him, "I know what they're going to say, but I wouldn't want what happened to you to happen to anyone." Wallace never did stop crying over that. He was humbled by the African American values Shirley Chisholm was showing: integrity, compassion, kindness. That's who she was. Jesse Jackson runs for president. Jesse Jackson probably has one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. A lot of people didn't know his genius till he ran for president in 1984 and 1988. He surprised a lot of folks then. They didn't think he had a chance because he was what the media called a fringe candidate. Not only was he black, but he had never held elected office. But the establishment started paying attention when a whole lot of people voted for him. Jackson was born in 1941 in South Carolina. His mama wasn't but 16 years old, and she wasn't married to Jesse's daddy, who was 33 and married to somebody else. Jesse's mother later married another man, and Jesse took his stepfather's last name, Jackson. Even after that, though, Jesse got teased by the other kids because his parents weren't married. The pain of that must have stayed with him. He lived under segregation, too, riding in the back of the bus and all the rest of it. He did all right as a young man, though. Got good grades in school and earned letters in football, baseball, and basketball. Went to college at the University of Illinois, and then North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I'm trying to remember who else earlier in the book went to that same school. Then he went to the Chicago Theological Seminary and almost got a master's degree. But he got so caught up in the civil rights movement that he left school. He was with Martin Luther King Jr. and James Bevel on the march from Selma to Montgomery. In 1965, Jackson went to work for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, and King and Bevel put him in charge of the SCLC's Operation Breadbasket, which was all about getting jobs for black folks. That's where Jesse's brilliance started to come out. In the same way that King had used boycotts to make it so black folks wouldn't have to ride at the back of the bus anymore, Jackson applied the idea to jobs, organizing boycotts of white-owned businesses to pressure them into hiring more black folks. The plan worked. After King got killed, Ralph Abernathy took over the SCLC, and he and Jackson clashed like two cymbals. When Abernathy tried to take Operation Breadbasket away from him, Jesse and his whole staff left the SCLC and formed another operation. Sorry, I'm psyching myself out. Did I say the abbreviation right? Yes, I did. And formed another operation, Operation PUSH, P-U-S-H. The PUSH stood for People United to Save Humanity, which Jesse later changed to People United to Serve Humanity. Jesse would lead rallies, standing there before big crowds of black folks and filling them with pride. He'd raise his fist and shout in that passionate southern voice, "I am somebody." And people would raise their fists and shout it right back at him. Whole stadiums full of people repeating after Jesse, "I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be unskilled, but I am somebody. I am black, beautiful, proud. I must be respected." I've heard it said that when Jesse was saying "I am somebody," he was saying it partly to himself, thinking about when he was teased as a boy because his parents weren't married. Later, Jesse started making a move toward politics. In 1984, he ran for president himself. He stepped down as head of Operation Push and formed the Rainbow Coalition. Jesse's whole thing was that oppressed groups, blacks, poor whites, Hispanics, women, needed one another. Now here was Jesse, a black man who had never been elected to anything, running for president of the United States. Of course, they didn't take him seriously as a candidate. That is until he finished up ahead of every office-holding Democrat except Senator Gary Hart and former Vice President Walter Mondale. Mondale ended up losing big to President Reagan that fall. Maybe Jesse hadn't held office before, but the things he was saying meant something to people. Despite the loss in 1988, he was back, this time with more money and better organization. Still, he got knocked out by Michael Dukakis, who got his butt kicked in November by George W. Bush's daddy, George H.W. Bush. By the time he spoke at the 1988 Democratic National Convention, Jesse's candidacy was over. But he gave one hell of a speech. He told the crowd, "America is not a blanket woven from one thread, one color, one cloth. When I was a child growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, and Grandmama could not afford a blanket, she didn't complain, and we did not freeze. Instead, she took pieces of old cloth, patches, wool, silk, gabardine, crocker sack. Only patches, barely good enough to wipe off your shoes with, but they didn't stay that way very long. With sturdy hands and a strong cord, she sewed them together into a quilt, a thing of beauty and power and culture. Now, Democrats, we must build such a quilt. Farmers, you seek fair prices, and you are right, but you cannot stand alone. Your patch is not big enough. Workers, you fight for fair wages. You are right, but your patch labor is not big enough. Women, you seek comparable worth and pay equity. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. Women, mothers who seek Head Start and daycare and prenatal care on the front side of life, relevant jail care and welfare on the back side of life. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. Students, you seek scholarships. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. Blacks and Hispanics, when we fight for civil rights, we are right, but our patch is not big enough. Gays and lesbians, when you fight against discrimination and a cure for AIDS, you are right, but your patch is not big enough. Conservatives and progressives, when you fight for what you believe, right wing, left wing, hawk, dove, you are right from your point of view, but your point of view is not enough. But don't despair. Be as wise as my grandmama. Pull the patches and the pieces together bound by a common thread. When we form a great quilt of unity and common ground, we'll have the power to bring about health care and housing and jobs and education and hope to our nation. We the people can win. Except that he'd already lost when he gave that speech. But it was a good speech. I really liked it. The Million Man March. Here's how I knew the Million Man March was going to be a success. Before it was held, I was coming off a 30-day fast in Los Angeles. 30 days? I don't know what got into me. I walked up this hill to go to the store to get me some bottled water, and I was so weak from the fast that walk up the hill was kicking my behind. Then a guy from across the street called out, "Dick Gregory!" He got off a ladder and ran over to me. I told him, "Help me with this water." He said, "I got my ticket to go to the Million Man March." That was 4 months before the march. That's when I knew how big it was going to be. The march took place on October 16th, 1995. The idea for it had come from Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam, but he worked with a number of groups to make it happen. The thinking behind it was that black men would come together from all over as a show of unity to commit to doing better as men and husbands and fathers, to demonstrate to the nation that the people thought of as criminals could gather in an orderly and peaceful way, and to draw attention to the problems facing the black community. With unemployment, mass incarceration, and the Reagan administration's cuts to any kind of program aimed at helping folks in poor communities, things were getting to a crisis stage for black people. Farrakhan was a lot of things before he was the organizer of the Million Man March. He was born Louis Eugene Walcott in 1933 in the Bronx. At 18, he went south to attend a teacher's college, but he loved music so much he tried his hand at that instead. He would sing and play the violin like nobody's business. He could sing and play the violin like nobody's business. Sang calypso. They used to call him the Charmer. Later, in the 1950s, he got into activism. And in Chicago, he joined the Nation of Islam. Just like the Malcolm X had given up his original surname, Little, Farrakhan became Louis X for a while. After all, Walcott was a slave master's name. Then Elijah Muhammad, head of the Nation of Islam, gave him the last name Farrakhan. Farrakhan worked with Malcolm X in Harlem and then took over Temple No. 7 after Malcolm's break with the Nation. He had a lot of Malcolm's charisma. After Elijah Muhammad died, Farrakhan thought he was going to take over the nation, but Elijah's son Wallace became the new head. Wallace broke away from black nationalism and was all about traditional Islam instead. At that point, Farrakhan broke off and started another Nation of Islam, more like the one Elijah had overseen. A lot of famous people spoke at the Million Man March. Jesse Jackson, Maya Angelou, Martin Luther King III, Benjamin Chavis, Rosa Parks, and Farrakhan. But the vast majority of the people there were just ordinary folks coming together. Farrakhan called it a day of atonement because as much as we were telling others that things had to improve, we were also telling ourselves that we had to improve. And calling it the Million Man March, that shows you the kind of thinking we need. Farrakhan and the rest didn't wait for the media to say there were 1 million people there that day. They made it 1 million. I met with Farrakhan and sat with him a while. I said to him, "Did you trademark the name Million Man March? Because if you didn't, the Ku Klux Klan can trademark it now and you can't use it." I took my 3 sons to the march with me. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go. 90% of the people who came didn't have hotel rooms because the hotels were full. You had brothers flying in from everywhere, man. Some came from Europe with their own planes. 1.9 million people were there. What I wanted my sons to see as we walked through the crowd was that you couldn't smell any marijuana. You didn't see cocaine on anybody's nose. And you didn't smell alcohol. That's how much respect everybody had for that occasion. And they didn't need to take drugs or drink alcohol to feel good that day. Only 2 arrests were made that whole day. A white boy called in a bomb threat from 14th and U Streets, and they kept him on the line long enough to trace and arrest him. The other arrest was of a Chinese and Middle Eastern selling hot dogs without a permit. Nothing else. That was it. A beautiful, glorious gathering. I would put just one march ahead of that, and that was King's March on Washington in 1963. Although he had just 250,000 people, still that 1963 march was the first time in the history of the planet that all black folks were invited to come to this major city. Not just the rich, not just the famous, not just the educated. King said, "All of y'all come." That was something else, man. Black folks were so used to being ignored that at first we didn't understand it. "You mean come to the nation's capital? I'm invited?" They came in their Sunday shoes, bunions and all, and you felt the joy. Joy. And that dirty dog, President Kennedy, had 7 divisions of troops surrounding the march because they thought there was going to be violence. Why? Because white folks knew that if somebody had been doing them like they'd been doing black folks, well, they'd have burned the city down. But no, man, nothing like that happened. What a glorious day. The Million Man March, well, that changed brothers' lives. After it, a lot of them joined churches, mosques, the NAACP, and other groups to try to improve our communities. The National Association of Black Social Workers received thousands of applications from people wanting to adopt black children. We proved we could come together. Black Lives Matter movement and Michael Brown. Black Lives Matter. Almost as soon as the phrase was invented, some small-minded people came out and said, "All lives matter." How come nobody used all lives matter until after we had used Black Lives Matter? You have to look at when the brother Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson in 2014 by the white cop Darren Wilson. I went there afterward. It happened 20 miles from where I was born. I was outraged, and when I got there and heard the whole story, here was a man lying bleeding on the ground for 4.5 hours. And in all that time, you didn't see an ambulance. You didn't see a car from the coroner's office, but you'd best believe the cops were there, though. You think we don't see through that? We marched 24 hours a day there in Ferguson, around the clock in protest. Not the same people. Different people came, including children. There was never any violence. Well, not until after 8 o'clock on the night they announced that the grand jury was not going to indict Darren Wilson. I ask you, why'd they wait until after it got dark to read the grand jury's verdict? I'll tell you why. Because they knew that nighttime is when violence can occur. I was there when that grand jury finding came down. I saw the reaction. I told Marty King, "Get out of here, man. Something's not right about this. Get out." We black folks can't see through this kind of behavior by white folks, but we'll say to one another, "Oh, we shouldn't use the word N-word. We have to use N-word." Because I won't say it. Why did the word N-word get changed to the N-word? And why were we stupid enough to go along with it? The word got changed because of the O.J. Simpson trial. There are millions of people who believe that O.J. Simpson killed his wife and Ron Goldman, and they believe Detective Mark Furman's racist statements and his use of the word N-word are why O.J. went free. Then some white person decided it was time to get rid of that word, and we black folks are stupid enough to go along with it. Saying N-word is an insult to me. Sorry, Mr. Gregory. My mama taught me not to say that word. Suppose one day men feel bad because of the way we have raped women, and those of us who didn't rape them feel bad because we sat by and didn't say anything. And so we decide to change the word rape to the R word. That's an insult. Dorian Johnson was Michael Brown's best friend and had been present at his shooting. Johnson said that Brown's hands were up when Darren Wilson shot him, saying that is not a federal crime. Saying that is not a federal crime. So why are people saying the FBI put him under witness protection? Because he was testifying to the grand jury. Turns out he lied. Here's a man who was lying about Michael Brown's hands up stance. And on the night the grand jury decision came down, his friend DeAndre Joshua was murdered. He was shot and his body burned up in a car. That was Johnson's friend. But more important than that, Joshua was killed 2 blocks from where the prosecutor read the announcement about the grand jury decision. And nobody talks about it. That's what this is about. So when you stop and look at what they do and how they do it, then you've got to say, hey, something's not right. Now let's look at the prosecuting attorney, Robert McCulloch. If you're a white prosecuting attorney anywhere in America and you're elected by a county that's predominantly white, and you have to send your children to school with their children, and you have a mortgage to pay and all kinds of other responsibilities, are you really going to try very hard to win an indictment for a white cop when you've got to go to those same folks to get reelected? What kind of fool would you have to be to do that? And we're surprised when McCulloch prosecutes a grand jury case that doesn't lead to Darren Wilson's indictment. Are we fools too? I'm running late, but I'm almost there. Almost at the end of the chapter. Obama. See, now I know you won't turn it off. He's a crowd drawer, right? First, when it comes to President Barack Obama, I have to apologize to white folks. I mean it. Up until Obama became president, I really believed that all white folks thought all black folks look alike. But after Obama got in office, I didn't have a single white person run up to me and say, "Excuse me, Mr. President." I really want to believe Obama's smart. But to let somebody put you in charge of a raggedy old, broken down, evil, hateful, ungodful, spiritual system of government like the one in this country, you've got to be a fool. I mean, please. After Obama was elected, he called me and asked, "What must I do?" I said, "Ask for a recount." But here is how Obama changed things around the world. If you've been following the G8 and G20 meetings all over the world for the last 20 years, you've seen that white children have shown up outside those meetings, and whoever was the U.S. president at that time, they'd hang and burn him in effigy. But in London, when Obama was flown in, they didn't hang him in effigy because they were sensitive enough to know how many black Americans had been lynched throughout history. Excuse me. Now, how is it that foreigners are sensitive to something that whites at home don't appear to be? Here at home, the white supremacy and double standards haven't gone anywhere. We've got one set of rules for black folks and another set for white folks and another set for women. You could see it even before Obama got elected, when he was running for president. Remember when he was campaigning and it came out that his pastor, Jeremiah Wright, had made some controversial comments against America? They asked Obama, "Well, how come you didn't leave the church?" Now, Obama's kind and nice, and he responded in a kind and nice way. But if they had asked me that, I'd have said, "Well, I didn't see any Catholic priests and nuns leave the church when the priest got caught abusing those little boys, so why have I got to be different?" Even Hillary Clinton asked why Obama hadn't left Jeremiah Wright's church. I got on the radio and said, "Miss Hillary, whatever Reverend Wright got caught doing, he wasn't breaking a law, but what your husband got caught doing, lying to a grand jury and obstruction of justice, that was a violation of the law, and he insulted and shamed you and your daughter around the world, but you didn't leave him." So the rules change depending on who you are. Even Obama couldn't change that. One thing he did change, though, and it'll stay changed, even with Trump in the White House, even with the way folks disrespected Obama, even with the way they want us to undo his legacy, even with the way they want to undo his legacy, Obamacare and all the rest. Before Obama, whatever white folks didn't have, at least they could take comfort in not being black. To them, a black person was nothing. Before Obama, if I had waved a magic wand that made all white folks dirt poor with no education, unable to read or write, living hand to mouth off the land, those dirt poor white folks could at least say, "Well, at least I ain't no N-word." Now that an N-word has been president, it doesn't help them to say that anymore. Excuse me. Barack Obama's presidency. Here's one of the things that is important about Barack Obama's presidency. If you were a black child and were 8 years old at the end of it, that means that from the time you were born until 2016, all you ever knew was that a man who looked like you had the most powerful job in the history of the planet. Then Obama leaves office and a white person becomes president. So you could say, "Mama, I didn't know a white person could be president of the United States." Tune into the next episode. Thanks for joining me. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and remember to hit that notification bell. People get unsubscribed from YouTube. That way you get notified when I make a new video. See you next time.